I was wandering around Sydney Harbour, and around Sydney Harbour there are all these glass symbols. And they have on them like sayings by famous writers, people who've been to Australia and so forth. And one of them was by Jack London, who was an adventurer in his own right. And it was his credo, which was something along the lines of, "I'd rather be ashes than dust, a spark burnt out in a brilliant flame rather than left mouldering and dry rot. For man's chief purpose is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days trying to prolong them. I shall use my time." And that kind of stuck with me for some reason. I remember wandering around, thinking about taking a picture of it and thinking about it a lot, and kind of, that's a pretty good way to define your life. I was at university, and I couldn't quite see myself going where everyone else was going. The decided path for someone like me, coming from a kind of middle class things, maybe try and become a lawyer, try and join one of the professions in some way, shape, or form, and it never truly really appealed to me beyond kind of like watching lawyers on TV and things like that. And so one day I was just, I remember searching and seeing some news about a yacht race going off, and I had barely ever sailed before. And I decided to just do a little bit more research, and I found that there was a yacht race that was going to be a round the world yacht race going off in like 3 years' time, just after I graduated university. So I was like, I'll do that. And so I spent the next 3 years like trying to find as much time as I could on boats, trying to train, trying to like apply, trying to get accepted for this kind of thing. And then eventually got to do this. And for me, those 10 months that I spent sailing around the world against the currents and prevailing winds with a group of like 18 people on a 72-foot tin can was... I've learned more from that than I have from anything else about leadership, about getting things done, about teamwork, about everything that's really important when it comes to business. I remember very early on, there was a situation where I managed to break one of the winches, which is pretty hard to do. You have to be pretty incompetent to break a winch. And I remember the first mate coming up to me, this was during my training, and I began this long explanation of how this series of unfortunate events had happened that had somehow led me, through no fault of my own, to break this winch. And the guy didn't care. He did not care how it happened. He just wanted to fix it. That's what he told me. He said, I don't care what happened, how do we fix it, move on. And that was like an amazing moment for me, because I realized that you didn't have to give these reasons. What mattered when you're out there on a boat where survival is never a sure thing was just fixing the problem and moving on, and not worrying about the why, the wherefore, or doing huge kind of post-mortems as to whose fault it was. And likewise, when you're out there on a yacht, like things like ego or concerns about credit all disappear. I mean, if you start getting like worried about that kind of stuff, you're going to kill someone. And people actually do. On a different boat, a guy went for the skipper with a knife. So you have a rule, which is like when something happens, even if it's a fight, you just leave it on the last wave, and you've got to be able to turn around and move on from it. So those were, some of the things that came from that race. But it certainly taught me a lot more about myself than I could have ever imagined. One of the key things was so my job was bowman. So I had to stand up at the pointy end and get the crap kicked out of me. And one of the key things that I learned from there was that you've got a team that is cold, exhausted. They haven't slept for more than a couple of hours at a time in the last 6 weeks. They're all frightened. You're frightened as well, because you've got 90-foot waves crashing over the bow. And the key things that I learned, I guess, was that one, clear planning before you go up, in terms of assigning of roles and responsibilities, so that people aren't just acting like automatons, but actually have a certain amount of responsibility of their own. So they know that within a certain field, it's their job and they're in charge. Making that happen, making sure that you're constantly over-communicating almost when you're in a situation, when you're in a crisis situation. And then every time after we finished a sale change or whenever there was a problem or a crisis, we would come back and we would review it. And once again, it's not about reviewing to find fault or anything like that. It's reviewing to see how could we improve this process for next time. If you think about doing that every sale change, you're doing the sale change once every half hour or so, maybe once every couple of hours, and doing that for 10 months consistently, by the end of that, you're getting pretty damn good. So it's that proper preparation, giving people responsibilities, and then constantly assessing what we did and how we could improve for next time, really trying to stretch our performance on that. That was kind of key. I think in some ways it's almost identical in that what you're doing in terms of in terms of throwing things out and iterations and so forth is you're launching an experiment. You're seeing how that experiment performs. You're reviewing that, and then you're starting a new experiment based upon what you've learned. So that's exactly the same as whether you're doing a cell change in the Southern Ocean or whether you're trying to build a product in Silicon Alley. You're deciding clearly what you want to build. You're communicating to people, okay, this is what we're trying to build. This is what we're trying to get right. Then you're seeing what happens in terms of user feedback. You're getting outside the building, find out what works, what doesn't. You're bringing back that in, and then you're being very, very willing to throw away the stuff that doesn't work and focus on the stuff that did, and then iterate upon that. So it may seem chaotic in the same way the deck of a racing yacht seems chaotic, but there's actually a lot of structure there underneath. When I was leading polar expeditions, that was also one of the great things in that you have this blank canvas of ice as far as you can see, and there's nothing to kind of grab your attention, so you're very much drawn inward. And I think there's two things. One thing that's always been my kind of guiding light, and going back to that Jack London credo, is everything that I try to do has got to try and make me reach, try and push me in some way, make me try and do something that I'm not sure I can do. You know, if you do what you know you're capable of, the best you can get is confirmation. If you do something that you're not sure you're capable of, that's when you have true discovery. And that, for me, has always been a kind of guiding light personally. And then I think that in the context of everyone else, I mean, it's one of those things where if you're not placing your actions in the context of other people and how you can change their lives in some way, then it does become ultimately a little bit navel-gazing. So, I mean, one of the key things that with our polar expeditions that my partner and I did, Ben Saunders, who's an amazing, amazing man, was we were always trying to bring as many people into the tent with us as possible. We went out and talked to thousands of school children, companies, trying to teach them about what it's like to be in a completely different world and open up their eyes to something which may be completely outside their experience. So that was wonderful. And then taking that to startups. I mean, Heartbeat, which I run now, which is a real-time analytics service, it's one thing to think about it as a business and a going concern, but one of the key things for us is to think about how can we try and transform the industry that we're in a good way. And one of the main industries that we work with is publishing, which is facing a huge crisis right now in terms of revenues and everything else. And there seems to be two pathways that it can follow. It can either follow one in which the amount of money spent on content creation is reduced dramatically. You know, we cramp down, we're making shoddier, worse content faster. Or there's another path, which is where we keep the focus on creating quality content, but we try and improve the processes around it. That's where we find the efficiency. It's like Toyota in the 70s, when they had to reduce costs, they didn't do so by making cars with cheaper metal or shoddier materials. They reinvented the processes around it, and in doing so completely transformed their industry. That's what we're trying to do as well. We're trying to find a way to transform the industry of quality content out on the web, and that is kind of one of the things that drives us beyond just traditional business. The first thing is letting yourself be open to opportunity and volunteering your thoughts and insight. In that, how I got into the startup world was completely by accident. I was happily doing polar expeditions, and someone sent me a business plan and just wanted to know my thoughts. And I got carried away and wrote 6 pages of notes on what I thought was both right and wrong with that business plan. And they came back to me and said, if you're so smart, why don't you come run this thing? And so that was purest accident that's defined my life. I mean, I'd say that that's happened almost every time. Like, reading Polar Expeditions was just like, getting into Polar Expeditions purely happened because I read a book, and then I started to write to the author and told him that next time he goes out, he should take me with him. So being open to opportunities, and also when it comes to like being disruptive in terms of like business, not worrying initially too much about the idea. Like, there's this big thing in the entrepreneurship world in which ideas don't matter, and that's not true. They do matter, but your first idea can still suck and be an incredible experience. You know, you'll learn more from deciding to try and do something and failing horrifically at it than from just grinding out perfectly passable performance in a standard job. So what I argue is just be open to opportunities and go out there and don't be afraid. In fact, almost embrace the opportunity to fail, because that's where you'll find yourself really expanding your boundaries. There's the fear, isn't there, of looking stupid or of failing publicly and so forth. And I think one of the key things is actually surrounding yourself with people who think the same way as you. And that's not to try and encourage groupthink, but to try and seek out individuals who are more open to risk as well. Because then, then being able to speak out or make stupid suggestions and so forth, which I do as my team will attest, on an absolutely like hourly basis, then it becomes so much easier. And it's still tough, especially when you think that everyone else knows so much more than you, and you're just a beginner. But no one knows quite as much as you think they do, and you'd be surprised how few of your ideas are truly stupid. It's actually just better to explore. So I don't want to say be brave about it, because I have a feeling that bravery actually comes after you've done an event, after you've done something. Like I remember being consistently terrified, and only throughout every yacht race, and only thinking that I was actually brave afterwards. So the key thing is just like, in some ways you've got to close your eyes and take that step forward at each time. You can either settle and you can say, I don't want to take any risks. If that's the choice you make, I absolutely applaud it. It's fine. But what you don't want to do is constrain the person who you are or who you can be in order to settle for those goals. Because one of the key things, I think, in a marriage or in a family is to always be feeling like you can look up to the other person, like they're truly kind of stretching themselves. You don't want every day for the rest of your life to be the same with the same person. You want someone who's changing and evolving with you. I think that's the thing that my wife and I focus on, is that there is definitely an element of risk, but we're big optimists and believing that somehow it'll all work out. And the fact that we can bring these new parts of our life every day, we're learning new things. It keeps the relationship much, much fresher than if I was just coming home having done the same thing every single day.